This is your Tuesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. It's Tuesday Morning Nickelback. I'm very excited about that. We bring you 3 different football segments every Tuesday. Andrew Krammer will join me in just a little bit for a Vikings film review, looking back at the win over Green Bay, how they were able again to push the ball downfield to Justin Jefferson, and whether that sort of aggressive play from Kirk Cousins is sustainable or whether he is getting uncomfortable with it. My least favorite team is my favorite team, loaded up with more haikus this week. Yes, 5 of them this week to describe most accurately, I will say, the win over the Packers, getting the Vikings to 5-5 on the season. A lot of drama in that game, and we're not done talking about that one. And Randy Johnson joins me after that to talk Gopher football. Nice win over Indiana on Saturday, but more importantly, huge game coming up with big implications against Wisconsin on Saturday. There's a chance the Gophers will be playing for the Big Ten West title. With so much to get to, we should probably just jump into it right now. It is film review time on Daily Delivery. Andrew Krammer covers the Vikings, joins me every Tuesday here. Andrew, how you doing?
Doing well, Mike. Good to be on with you.
It is. We'll do this again on Access Vikings in a day or two here, so look forward to that as well. A little bit more in-depth Vikings coverage over there, but plenty to unfurl from this past week. 34-31 Vikings win over Green Bay, a game that had plenty of twists and turns, but one consistent thing throughout that game was Justin Jefferson for the second straight week making a lot of big plays downfield, Andrew.
Yeah, that kid is impressive. And you watch that game and there's so many just amazing individual efforts that he had made. I mean, the second touchdown at the end where he just leaps over the defender and kind of body control, turns away, the ball's kind of thrown behind him. He jumps up over Eric Stokes, the rookie Packers corner, elevates above him, tracks the ball. I mean, these are all elements that you see from the great receivers. You see them it was reminiscent of a Randy Moss catch almost that you saw against the Packers so many times, where he can just soar above the other defenders and kind of pick the ball out of the sky like that. He's just got so many traits that are hard to find. And to have this in a complete package at 22, 23 years old, whatever he is, it's incredible. And he's setting all kinds of records, and him and Devontae Adams, I think, are the only receivers with, however many 100-yard games that they've had since 2020. And for Jefferson to do that at the start of his career, I think he's nearing the all-time mark of most 100-yard games in his first 2 years in the NFL. I think he only needs a few more this year to do it, which is very doable for him.
Well, good for the Vikings to, again, not forget who their best players are, to continue to get them the football. It's always a very important thing to do. And in this game, it felt like they were able to do it with a couple of kind of interesting wrinkles. In your, as you watch the game back a second time to kind of look for particular things, how were they getting the ball to Jefferson? And, what was the kind of the level of scheme, level of, risk on some of those throws that were coming his way?
Yeah, they've gotten back, and Clint Kubiak and that coaching staff have gotten back to trying to leverage unique situations to get their best players the ball, because they gotten away from that in the middle of the year when everybody made jokes about, the CJ Ham checkdowns, the Conklin checkdowns. At some point after the first few games, they decided we're just going to use these guys as decoys sometimes and try to leverage the other guys into open spaces. Well, this time they're putting Jefferson in the backfield, running an option route with him against off coverage. Green Bay throughout the entire game played a lot of off coverage. They just backed up, wanted to keep everything in front of them. Problem is they didn't do it very well, because you're seeing times like that where the Vikings can counter, put Jefferson underneath, get him open. They've never lined up Jefferson in the backfield. That was an entirely new thing in week 11. And then earlier in the game, they were able to even beat the off coverage with deep routes, where they put Jefferson and Adam on the same side of the field. And then instead of an opponent being able to cover both of those guys with 2 safeties on opposite sides, you're able to put both of those guys on one side of the field, and you're able to then attack a single safety over the top of that half of the field. And that ended up, I think with Jefferson's catch that he had down at the 1 yard line, that's what happened. Him and Adam were both on one side of the field. Adam releases underneath. Jefferson goes deep. Both of them end up open, and Kirk can pick which guy he wants to go to. In that case, it was Jefferson. So I just think they made the Packers look silly in coverage a lot, and a lot of that had to do with this coaching staff coming up with more unique ways to get these guys the ball, because it had just gotten stale there through the middle of the season up until recently, really the past 2 games.
And, as we talked about in previous shows, it does take two ends of that connection to make it work. And I thought one thing that was impressive to me in this game was Kirk Cousins' ability to withstand pressure, I think for the second consecutive week, really, and to still get the ball downfield. I'm just looking at some Pro Football Focus stats. Cousins was pressured, according to PFF, on 45.9% of his dropbacks. That was the second highest rate of the week, but he still had 11.1 yards per pass attempt under pressure, 8 completions on 15 attempts, 167 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Now, he did have one that was, he had one what's called a big-time throw. He also had one turnover-worthy play. I think the Vikings would probably take that if the difference between that and old Kirk was maybe a few more completions, but not nearly as many yards, and giving up a lot of opportunities by not hanging in there and making that throw and checking it down a little bit sooner.
Yeah, Kirk played very, very well under pressure. And I didn't realize the volume, like the amount of pressure he was under until rewatching the game, and certainly until after you read off those stats. That puts it in perspective, because there were a lot of plays, including, I think it was his second throw, where he finds Jefferson for that 43-yarder downfield. Devondre Campbell, the middle linebacker for Green Bay, is coming right up the middle, gets in his face, and Kirk's able to kind of just backpedal, lob the thing up, put it up there for Justin, and he comes down with it. That was the story throughout much of that game, where Kirk just gives his guy a chance, isn't too phased by the pressure, can stand in the pocket and deliver downfield. That's been always the thing, that if he takes early hits like that, like I said, that was the second throw of the game. He was getting drilled by the middle linebacker before. And when things go poorly, that affects him. He starts checking down. He gets conservative, all those things. And I found it interesting that Mike Zimmer had said this today after the Packers game about Kirk. He said, I want him to keep doing it like he's doing it. He can't second guess himself. If he throws an interception, that's life, but you keep going for the jugular. It's going to open up a lot of other areas in the running game, and we've got to keep being that way. That's a total change from what
Mike Zimmer said. That, are you sure? Yeah. He was not like, is someone controlling his voice box? Are we sure it was Mike Zimmer? Is Mike Zimmer safe? Is he in a safe place?
That was John DeFilippo as Mike Zimmer. No, I think it's a total change. I think this is a total change because Zimmer, I think, realizes his defense is not going to keep the water level down for your offense to the point where you can be conservative. You cannot go out there and risk burning 6 minutes off the clock and scoring no points when your defense is going to give a touchdown up right away. 4 straight touchdown drives by the Packers ended that game. It was not the defense that was going to keep a minute. Zimmer knew it was the offense. That's why Zimmer told the offense at the end of the game, finish it, don't score, sit on the ball. I don't even want Rodgers to get the ball back down 7 points with however many seconds it would have been left. I just think Zimmer realizes to keep his job, to keep this Vikings team moving in the right direction, you need to change your identity a little bit. And he throws in there about how throwing can set up the run, but that's just a nice way of saying we need to be potentially more of a throw first team, to attack downfield, get these guys away in terms of the defenders away from the line of scrimmage. And then you can kind of work off Cook from there. And it is a pivot from what we've seen before. And I found that very interesting because Kirk, when he's under pressure like that, some mistakes are going to happen. And Mike, how close are we to talking about a back-breaking interception at the end of that game costing them the win?
That's exactly right. I mean, I mentioned that with Royce on Monday's show. It was like, the narrative I was creating in my head before they come back from the commercial break, and you probably saw it a little bit sooner because you're there, but I wasn't following the game on Twitter. I didn't see people being like, oh, this is going to get overturned. It was a surprise to me when they came back. I didn't even realize that there was any kind of bobble when Savage went to the ground. I was writing the blog post in my head of this is why you can't trust Kirk Cousins. You got to, this, that, and the other thing. And then they come back and surprise, turns out it's overturned and he goes and leads them down the field for, the game-winning field goal. So yeah, the narrative 180 degrees changed. I mean, he had played a very good game up to that point, but all that really matters in this league right now is the final 4 minutes. And if he didn't get it done there,
they were going to be 4-6 and really looking at, a tough sledding ahead to get the playoffs.
Yeah, and that's why or any fans or media, anybody with the power of hindsight, when they're evaluating this Vikings team, if they lose in San Francisco because Kirk throws a late pick and he's being aggressive like that, you have to be process over results. You have to realize this is what everybody's been clamoring for, and you're going to have to deal with the other side of that coin sometimes if you do lose a game because you're taking that chance. And it all comes back to the defense. Again, it comes back to because this team is not built the way Mike Zimmer wants to typically win games. Credit to him for finally adjusting it a little bit, it would seem, in week 11 or 12, or I guess it's been a couple weeks now where he's embraced
year 7.5.
He's embraced more of this aggressive approach. Well, I guess it's a year and a half of the defense underwhelming, but if it took this long to do it, he's finally there. And that's what enabled them to really push the ball downfield, release Justin Jefferson against the rest of the NFL and be 5-5 at this point.
Last thing for you, Andrew, do you think this is sustainable? There's a quote from Kirk Cousins that was in Ben Gessling's second day piece on our website and in the newspaper Tuesday. The quote from Cousins, I could point to a half dozen throws there that were too aggressive, and I could argue that was one of them, talking about that throw to Thielen on the last drive that kind of, just scooted past Rasul Douglas and got to Thielen and ended up getting them into field goal range. He said, I don't think you want to live doing that. I think that we got away with it a couple times. I keep saying we're on a razor's edge, but that's a play where it's an example of it. The difference between him catching that and making a play that he did is going the other way is very small. What do you think about that? Does that make you think Kirk Cousins wants to live this way, or is this, is he being kind of nudged in a direction that he's not entirely comfortable with?
Yeah, that quote combined with Zimmer also said Sunday after the game, he told Kirk, go out and score touchdowns. I will back us off when we need to back us off. That says to me that the conservativeness in this offense might be on Cousins a little more than maybe we had been talking about, because I think the prevailing theme or thought was that it's been Zimmer kind of keeping his lid on this offense and wanting to be run first, all these things. That is true. But maybe Kirk has held them back in 2021, for instance, a little longer than Mike Zimmer might have even wanted them to. If Zimmer wanted them taking more chances in that Ravens game, for instance, or that Dallas game that they lost after the bye week, because Kirk has been one too that I think he likes those numbers. I think he likes to look at those numbers and say, I threw 24 touchdowns to 2 picks or whatever it is. And that doesn't necessarily win you games, as we saw, because if Kirk throws a pick at the end of that Packers game and they end up losing, I think the right thing to say is still that was the right call to make. It's still a right to be aggressive. And I asked Adam Thielen today, actually, about that catch that Kirk referenced. It was that fastball that was right over Adam's shoulder on the sideline. Adam really didn't even see it coming. Adam said, look, these are the kind of plays that we need to have. Even if the timing needs to be 100% perfect, put it up there and trust us to do it. And I think that shows you that you could trust these guys to make these plays. And it worries me that Kirk said something like that, because it does show you more into his way of thinking of, and I'd rather make the calculated decision of always having the odds on my side. And sometimes guys like Jefferson and Thielen can tilt the odds toward your favor more than maybe we would think.
Well, we'll see what happens against San Francisco. That's an interesting and very important game. Suddenly both teams 5-5. The winner of that one really has inside track with 6 games left to get one of those playoff spots. The other team still would have a chance, but dropping an NFC game and losing that head-to-head tiebreaker would be a pretty big deal for either team. So we'll see if aggressive Kirk and the Vikings show up, or if it's a different kind of game out there, Andrew. Good stuff. We'll see you next week. Okay.
Hey, looking forward to it. Thanks, Mike.
And again, like Andrew and I talked about, the thing I'll be interested in the most to see against San Francisco is whether the Vikings keep pushing it downfield. I think they're going to need to against the 49ers. San Francisco, like the Vikings, kind of a sneaky 5-5 team. You look at advanced stats like DVOA on Football Outsiders, San Francisco way up there, just like the Vikings, maybe better than their record indicates. Vikings are going to need to score points to win this game. Can't go conservative now because going aggressive has been working for them.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
It's time for my least favorite team is my favorite team. And Keith, I got to be honest. Sometimes this segment is more fun when we get to gripe about the team, but I think this week it's just more fun because Sunday's game was a really entertaining game that somehow, some way, the Vikings found a way to win. There was about 7 different twists and turns that could have taken it in a lot of different directions, including what I thought was going to be an interception that was going to lead to Aaron Rodgers marching down the field and beating them. But instead, that call is correctly overturned. Sorry, Packers fans, correctly overturned, and they win the game 34-31. Sir, how would you like to express yourself in the wake of this victory?
Well, Michael Rand of the Star Tribune, as we've established in the last podcast segment I was on, I have the soul of a poet. And
you do.
I actually was having a lot of trouble expressing myself in the early weeks of this segment. And it wasn't until I finally turned to poetry, which I think you and I can agree is really the only medium in which football should be spoken about.
That's how most game stories are written.
Right. And now I believe that I have a voice. And so, as like last week, today I have some haiku for you in order to sort of express how I felt about that game.
My sources tell me that you have 5 this week after having 4 last week. The 5 perhaps being symbolic of the nature of the victory. It was their 5th win. Last week was their 4th win, and there you have it.
Right. And also they have 5 losses. So it's the balance of nature. Again, speaking in the language.
5-7-5. I hope they don't finish the season 5-7-5 because that would be weird.
That would be very weird. Haiku number 1. For those who don't remember, haiku, 3-line poem. First 2 lines, 5 syllables. Second line, 7 syllables. Meant to capture a moment or a thought or idea or just a revelation, as it were.
5-7-5. Here we go.
Haiku number. Hey, Shailene Woodley. Aren't you famous or something? Why marry that guy?
He was a pretty good quarterback. He played pretty well, but yeah, he looks like he's going through like a little bit of a crisis this
through
year.
Some things. Randy Moss very famously walked off the field one game and got absolutely roasted by all kinds of people. He was treated as if, by walking off the field, he had taken a sack of murdered puppies to an orphanage and then burned down the orphanage, right? He was treated that way. Meanwhile, Aaron Rodgers is standing there at the end of the second quarter, at the end of the first half, in the tunnel, having just basically done the exact same thing Randy Moss had done, right? Was not there for whatever last little bit there was. He was not the one who took the last snap.
Yeah, Jordan Love had to take the kneel down.
Right. That guy is so checked out. It is just, and somehow both checked out and yet not at the same time. And it just must be awful. It must be awful to be one of his coaches or teammates, right? Because we've all had that crappy coworker, right? We've all had that person that we just didn't gel with as a coworker. But then to have that person be fundamental to your own success and then have that person decide that they don't care just has to be excruciating. And it's beautiful.
I hope they I don't hope they do this, but I hope they get to a critical game this year. And he's just doing, he's decided that he's just full on, doesn't care anymore. And he just starts chucking it underhand, like Richie Tenenbaum in the Royal Tenenbaums, just serving it underhand and the biggest, sitting down, take his shoes and socks off.
Or perhaps just sitting on the field doing Sudoku or something.
Maybe whatever works for him. I'm open to suggestions as long as it means some defeats. Okay, haiku 2.
Haiku number 2. 18 and 19 can help you win football games. Who knew, Mike Zimmer?
Yeah, Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. Actually, Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, if we're counting upward from 18 to 19. They were pretty good in that game, especially Justin Jefferson. It's amazing. We talked about this 2 weeks in a row. And here's the thing. They absolutely don't win that game if they don't have that mentality change where they got to take some chances and let it rip on offense. They could not. I don't think, have won a conservative game. You're not going to beat Aaron Rodgers, especially when he's making the throws he made, even if he's partially checked out, even if he looks like he'd rather be, camping by himself somewhere in Northern California. He still can beat you. You wouldn't have won that game trying to play it safe.
It's funny, right? It's funny. All it took was for everybody on planet Earth to be convinced that Mike Zimmer was going to lose his job, the stubborn way that he was coaching his team, for him to finally figure out 8 games into the season, hey, maybe we ought to let our best players do what they do best. It's crazy. All it took was 7.5 seasons for him to actually assess his football team properly and correctly. Now, admittedly, there were times when the defense was better, but to actually decide, hey, you know what? Instead of stubbornly doing what I think needs to be done on offense to win a football game, because this is what scares me as a defensive coordinator, we should maybe actually let the high-priced players and the significant talents on the team do something. It's crazy. It's amazing.
It's amazing how that worked.
That's all it took.
It's all it took.
Him maybe finally losing his job.
Yeah, but they, I guess better now than never. If you can't learn at a certain point, then there's no point in even trying in that case. But yeah, it was a. But
it might lead to like a worst case scenario, though, right? In one sense, that I think many of us were ready to be done with Zimmer, and then all of a sudden we get this little change of how we're going to do things, and let's kind of like, well, all of a sudden we're in the hunt.
We're in the hunt, baby. The graphics coming up. The graphics coming. Actually, they're not even just in the hunt. If the season ended today, which would be weird because there's still 7 games left, they would be in the playoffs. They're the number 6 seed right now, not even the 7 seed. And, there's a bunch of teams in that squishy middle with 5 wins. So, don't get too excited about that right now, but they have a good conference record. They're 4-2. They've got some winnable games down the stretch. So get to play Detroit again, get to play the Bears twice. I don't think there's a game left on their schedule that they couldn't win. Theoretically, I don't think there's, any one game you're like, oh, there's just no chance they're going to win that game. They got some tough games. They got to play at Green Bay. They got to play the Rams. They got to play at San Francisco next week, which is a tough one all of a sudden. But yeah, they're a little bit more than in the hunt, and they got there quickly. And that was a big one. Okay. Haiku 3.
Okay. I think 3 ties into this conversation as well, too. But let us
Beautiful.
Continue the conversation. Number 3, end of the first half, a chance to finish the game. Why use CJ Ham?
Yeah, the toss sweep to CJ Ham. That was in Mark Craig's 5 extra points piece today. Good stuff by him. Yeah, I don't know. That was a curious. What was it? 3rd and 1, and they needed a yard, and they end up giving the ball back to Green Bay. Green Bay gets a touchdown. They're up 16-3 before that touchdown. They keep the ball there. Maybe they go down and get some points. Maybe it's moot. Maybe they wind up punting later, and the touchdown happens at some point anyway. But yeah, that was on a day where they dialed up some pretty good things. That was a real head scratcher that did not work, forced them to punt, and that could have been a real turning point in the game had they not been able to rescue it at the end.
Well, it speaks to the question as to whether or not this change of heart we're seeing from Zimmer in the offense is actually something that we can count on, or more of a bit of a mirage, as it were. Is it something that they're actually going to commit to? Or in this moment when they felt they really needed to get something, they reverted back to some of their own ways and tactics. And so I don't know, right? I don't know. I guess it's possible after 7.5 years, Zimmer is going to change the way that he does things because the stakes are high enough for him to finally decide to do that. But it was a little indication of we're not so far over the fence with where the offense is headed and where the philosophy is headed that we can necessarily count on it perpetuating into the future.
Yeah, and if you heard Zimmer and Cousins talking after the game, I think both of them got a little nervous about some of the near turnovers that happened yesterday, and understanding that or believing at least that there's going to come a point where they got to dial it back a little bit. And I get it. Like you don't have to have your foot on the gas the whole time. There is a time and place for a slightly more buttoned up approach if you have a lead, if your running game is going well, things like that. But hopefully at some point we will have some evidence that they've learned when to hit the gas and when to not hit the gas. And I don't know I think you're right. I don't know if we're there yet.
Right. Imagine if they had tried to stick the dagger in there as well too. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying.
Yeah.
So
haiku
number 4.
Yeah.
Number 4. Can you imagine? What if the O-line was good? Loins are tingling.
Oh, wow. I'm going to have to take a minute on that one. Okay.
All I'm saying is the offensive line was terrible.
Yeah,
that first play of the game
where Mason Cole's just getting shoved back into Kirk Cousins, doing his best Garrett Bradbury impression. Yeah, it was not good.
The Green Bay defender almost took the handoff from Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
Right. And the pocket was constantly collapsing on it. And so this is this is an offense that put up 34 points with a truly bad offensive line performance. And I'm sorry, Brent. Truly bad offensive line performance.
It was awful.
Could you imagine if they had a little bit more stability there? With the weapons that they have, they would be unstoppable. They would be utterly amazing. And the fact that they can put up that many points and that much offense with the state of the line that is in now, when it really did not play very good, just suggests what life could be like.
Yeah, it was. That was dicey on the offensive line for sure. Yeah, Mason Cole got pushed around pretty good. I think Cousins was pressured on more than 40% of his dropbacks, and sometimes it was coming from a bunch of different places. I actually thought Cousins played a good game. He got away with a couple throws, but particularly his willingness to make some throws under pressure or right when he was about to get hit. You don't always see him do that, but I thought he had a ball to Jefferson that went for a pretty big play where that happened, and some other things where he was able to sustain some of those drives by making throws when the line wasn't necessarily helping him out as much.
Well, he's had a very good season. I mean, he's been excellent, and we know that he's capable of a certain level of success. And perhaps now that there's more encouragement, I guess, to open things up, maybe they can actually sustain this success in a way that you didn't expect them to do in previous seasons.
Yeah, I'm just surprised because where he's broken down in the past is where he's kind of defaulted to check downs when he's faced pressure. And I didn't think he did that on Sunday. I think there were 3 or 4 plays where he knew he was going to get hit or he was feeling pressure and he either slid or just waited that split second and made the throw and took the hit and made it work. So
I agree. It was very impressive. We'll see if it lasts.
We will see if it lasts. Haiku 5.
Okay. Last one. And I think this really sums up the entirety of our conversation. The Green Bay Packers are nothing but a dumb cult. I'm glad that they lost.
Well, we're not too far removed. You see, they just put up a whole bunch of new shares of pretend stock for their fans to buy, like $300 a share. I think they're
bargain. It's a bargain.
$300 a share, and I think they're limited to I can't remember what the number was, but I crunched the numbers, and it's like they can raise $90 million selling these shares of. Basically, it's memorabilia. I mean, if you have $300, I wish you would spend it on something more meaningful, maybe help somebody who doesn't have $300, but I guess
buy them some Packer stock.
Buying Packer stock is just ridiculous, and it does speak to the nature of the East cult that exists over there. But you can certainly be glad that they lost. I'm not going to stand in your way.
Isn't it amazing how the narrative of a season can change so quickly? Remember when the Vikings were 3-5? They had just lost the game to Dallas that they gave away against the backup quarterback Cooper Rush, and then the game in Baltimore where they had plenty of opportunities to win that game, but let Baltimore back in and couldn't close it out. Just think about where they were when they were 3-5 2 weeks ago. Season looked dead, talking about Mike Zimmer. Is he going to get fired? 2 wins later, we're talking about maybe making it to the playoffs, having the inside track on that. Just a reminder that even in a season like the NFL where every game is magnified, you can turn things around rather quickly, and it's probably, the old cliche that teams like to use and players like to use is taking things one game at a time probably is the right way to go, and we get a little too excited about outcomes that don't determine exactly how things are going to go down the road.
Welcome back, Randy Johnson, covers Gopher football for the Star Tribune. We chat every Tuesday about the Gophers. This week, a little bit more significance than others, Randy. Gophers took care of Indiana on Saturday. Fell behind early, but made it a pretty easy win by the end, 35-14. Not a good Indiana team, even there was some optimism about them coming into the year, right? Because they had it going last year.
Yeah, they were very good last year, and they had pretty much all their key offensive parts and some really good defensive parts coming back. But they got off to a really tough start. They lost to Iowa 34-6, I believe it was, in the opener, and then started to get injuries to guys like their quarterback, Penix. And then it just went, car started swirling down the drain, and they lost 7 straight now, and 2-9 overall, and winless in the Big Ten.
We'll get to what's at stake on Saturday for the Gophers here in a minute. Obviously, they play Wisconsin at Huntington Bank Stadium, and potentially at kickoff, Big Ten West championship could be on the line for the Gophers. Certainly will be for the Badgers. But let's talk Indiana quickly, even though it ended up being a pretty comfortable win. Some important things I felt like happened in that game, one of them being Tanner Morgan having one of his better and most complete games of the year at a time when, there was certainly some skeptics wondering if he was the right person to even be the quarterback. And he had a good, solid game against Indiana, rekindled his connection with Chris Ottman-Bell. What was your impression of that piece of the win?
Yeah, Tanner Morgan played very well, I thought. He was early on, there were a few passes that might have been a little bit behind receivers, but he settled in very well. They got him into a rhythm. He ended up 14-20 for 196 yards and 2 touchdowns to Ottman-Bell, and 2 nice catches by Ottman-Bell on those. Basically, one really impressive play, Ottman-Bell's second TD catch. Morgan had a blitz in his face, blitzing linebacker in face. We got called for roughing and still completed that pass. That was pretty impressive. He was sharp, and I like the play calling a lot better too. They mixed things up a bit. It enabled Tanner to spread it around. It was like 6 or 7 different receivers. They used the tunnel screen. They used the middle screen to tight end Brevin Spanford. They found Brevin Spanford wide open to the side. Nobody within 15, 20 yards from him. The hurdled defender on the way to inside the 5 got taken down to the 4. So it was kind of fun to see that type of passing attack. Plays like that out of the passing game.
It's got to give him more confidence going into Saturday. And before we kind of get into the specifics of the implications of playing Wisconsin, what that matchup looks like, Randy, remind the listeners what potentially is at stake and what needs to happen for them to come away with the Big Ten West championship and be able to play for the Big Ten title.
Okay, well, what has to happen is they have to get into a 4-way tie. The other teams being Iowa, Wisconsin, and Purdue for the first place in the West. It sounds pretty complicated, but it isn't too bad right now. So on Friday afternoon, a 12:30 game on Big Ten, Iowa visits Nebraska. Iowa and Wisconsin now are tied 1 game ahead of the Gophers and Purdue. Purdue cannot win the title, but they can play a role in it. Anyway, if Iowa loses to Nebraska, then what has to happen on Saturday for the Gophers to win the West would be Purdue beating Indiana, which very possible, and then the Gophers beating Wisconsin, which that's not going to be an easy task.
Right. And I was a little
not
bit
a tiebreaker.
Right. And I was a little bit surprised. Nebraska, even though they've only won 3 games this year, Iowa has got 9-2, I think. Nebraska like a 3.5 point favorite in that game, and owing to the fact that that's still a name program, and owing to the fact that they've been in a lot of games. Played Wisconsin pretty close this past week, played the Gophers close, have played a lot of good teams close, but have by and large lost all of those games. So Gophers certainly need some help. PJ Fleck acknowledging that the path would have been a lot easier had they not, had that slip up against Illinois, or had they been able to beat Iowa, but still opportunity existing where I wasn't sure one was going to exist after they lost to Iowa.
Yeah, that's the situation. When they dropped the Illinois game, they were in lone in first place in the West, and then that dropped them down to tie. Then they fell back one game back after the loss to Iowa. So they didn't get much help last week, but just by beating Indiana, they helped themselves.
Yeah, exactly. They helped themselves, and now they're give themselves a chance. Wisconsin started off the year in rough shape, but they've progressively gotten better. They put up 35 points on Nebraska. Seems like their offense has been at least somewhat better lately. This is again, we've talked about the rivalry games with PJ Fleck. They beat Wisconsin in 2018, but aside from that, have not beaten Iowa or Wisconsin. I believe a combined 1-9 now against those two opponents, or maybe not quite that much. 1-8 against those two opponents. Sorry about that. Yeah. So, a lot at stake. Even if they don't end up winning the Big Ten West, this is a chance for a signature win in a year that doesn't really have one of those yet.
Yeah, right now for the Gophers, the signature win might be considered Purdue, and that's kind of a stretch there, I would say. They to make this season feel like it's more of an accomplishment. I think getting one of those trophies is required. Basically, they could go out with a pretty good feeling if they get the axe back, and then it would help them too in bowl positioning a bit. Obviously if things fall right, they could end up in Indy. It's stranger things that have happened in college football. I'm not going to say it's gonna, but it's not as far-fetched as it might have seemed.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's been going well for Wisconsin? I think this happens where they lose a couple games sometimes at the beginning of the year. Everybody counts them out, and they do seem to get better as the year goes on. Typically,
yeah, they certainly have. They've won 7 in a row now. Big thing lately has been their freshman running back, 17-year-old freshman running back. In fact, Braylon Allen went for 228 yards against Nebraska on Saturday. He's a 238-pounder, 4-star recruit. He's going to be the next in their long line of outstanding running backs. He's been pretty impressive so far.
Okay, and they got it seems like Mertz is going a little bit better lately as well, although they'll still lean primarily on that running game. Gave up 28 to Nebraska, which was a little surprising to me. That defense had been better than that.
Yeah, their defense is probably the best in the Big Ten, and the Nebraska, that might be one of the reasons why they're favored to beat Iowa. Nebraska played them pretty tough. It was back and forth game until Wisconsin finally took the lead for good late, like 3.5, 4 minutes left, I believe.
So what has to happen? Let's finish with this thought. I mean, if the Gophers are going to win this game, they're close to a touchdown underdog, even though they're playing at home. What's the formula for them to be able to win this game? Is it low scoring, medium scoring? What kind of game do they want to be in?
I think they want a game where they can get their passing game going. I don't think they're going to be able to just slug it out with just the running game against Wisconsin. I think the Badgers are too good up front to do that. I think they're going to have to be able to be creative. If they were similar the way they were last week and trying different things, getting success there. Obviously, they're playing a much different defense than Indiana's. But yeah, they got to be balanced. They obviously need to avoid turnovers, and maybe they can get a big play here or there, special teams or defense.
Well, it'll be fun. Like these trophy games are so much more fun when something is at stake, aside from just pride, and plenty figures to be at stake on Saturday. Randy, good stuff. Look for your coverage on Saturday, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Okay, sounds good, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Big game like Randy talked about. Hoping to get over to Gophers football media access a little later on today to bring you some good stuff from that on a later podcast this week. So look forward to that as well. Let's finish quick with the cooler. Monday Night Football was a huge night for Minneapolis City football. Tyler Johnson, former Minneapolis North standout, former Gophers standout, plays for Tampa Bay, of course, and played in that game 57 snaps. You might be less familiar with Ellerson Smith, former Minneapolis South standout, now with the New York Giants, played 17 snaps in that game last night and got a chance to play. So Minneapolis North against Minneapolis South on Monday Night Football. Pretty cool indeed. That'll do it for today. Got to have Chris Hine on Wednesday's show. Wolves on a 4-game winning streak heading into playing Miami Wednesday night at Target Center. Old friend Jimmy Butler coming in. That will be a good measuring stick game in a lot of different ways. So I want to get Chris's thoughts on what's going on with these Wolves and how well they've been playing lately. Should have some more good stuff coming later in the week. Phil Miller to talk Twins, payroll breakdown, Mark Craig, NFL picks, and like I said, some Gophers football access that I hope to get a lot of good stuff from as well. Thank you for listening today. We'll be back at it on Wednesday.